Your Clothing is Still Downloading by Huckleberry Hax. Chapter 11. A wedding I had been late to. The 2:15 had got in a full hour and 40 minutes overdue because of a track fault. I'd taken a taxi to the church and rushed to the entrance in a fast stroll I hoped might still carry some semblance of dignity about it. I needn't have hurried. The only commotion my entrance caused was a collective intake in anticipation, the turning of all heads, the rising of shoulders in expectation of someone important. Then the 100 or so guests assembled turned back round again, and the mutterings crept across the rows towards me like the sea returning over the sand. I'd sat clumsily in an aisle seat at the back. A large woman in front of me then turned and mouthed the words, "We're waiting for the groom," as though some sort of explanation for this disappointed response to my arrival was required. She looked about 60. The linger at the end of her statement was just long enough to suggest that she was expecting some sort of response from me beyond the nod I gave in reply, so I added a smile, thinking in my head it was like a smiley tacked to the end of a written sentence. I wondered if the same thought had occurred to her. I knew that a good 10 of the assembled witnesses were SL regulars, and there was no reason to suppose that she was not amongst their number. The woman made a face that was halfway between a wink and a nose wrinkle, and it made the thick pancake on her cheeks crease slightly. She turned back to the front, then straight away twisted back round again, this time with a half-consumed tube of sweets offered in her left hand over her shoulder. "Would you care for a mint?" she asked. I took one, mouthing an exaggerated "thank you," cementing a new bond that, if nothing else, meant I'd have someone to talk to in the reception later if everything fell flat with Tresney. As I sucked on the mint, I scanned all the backs of the heads thinking, which one are you? We'd arranged to meet up in front of the gate a half hour before the start of the ceremony, but I'd missed that time by nearly an hour. No whispered "Harold" had caught my ear when those heads had turned at the appearance of my shadow on the aisle. I'd seen no look of expectation or anxiety. Perhaps the non-appearance of the groom was an altogether more pressing issue for the moment. That, I supposed, was fair enough. This was actually the second marriage of Dev and Feather that I'd attended, the first having been their SL union 7 months previously. There had been some talk of providing some sort of an SL feed for the real-life version, so that the residents online could observe and smile, but, as I'd suspected would be the case from the start, that had all proved too technical and time-consuming, church walls and wireless, obstruction thereof, being a pretty key factor in that. The first wedding had been an affair of intermittent voice, pauses for poseball rezzing, and lots of typed aw's and ah's. It wasn't the first SL wedding I'd been to, but it did little to reduce that sense of hilarious bizarreness I'd always felt at such occasions. The lagged walk up the aisle alone. At one point, bride and groom had sailed right through the altar off the edge of the sim and out to sea together for a full minute before returning to their starting point, had caused me very nearly to snort my tea across the keyboard. All that aside, there was something about it that was undeniably moving. There was a sense amongst the community I belonged to back then that Dev and Feather were two people perfectly matched who had somehow managed to solve life's puzzle and find each other. Words and phrases like soulmate and life partner were used plentifully and unashamedly. These two people appeared in all respects to complete each other, and there was a real sense of achievement to the union, as though we were watching the construction of an enormous bridge or the launching of human beings to the moon. That first wedding was also where I'd met Tresney. At the reception, I'd sat by myself at a table, and she'd sent me an IM compliment about the quality of my suit from across the other side of the dance floor. When I'd sent her back a thanks and a smiley, she'd added that her date had had to go AFK for a few minutes to take an important call, and that it seemed wasteful for two such great-looking avatars as us to spend that time alone. so we danced. It wasn't the beginning of our relationship, but a month later we were dancing again in a field of blue flowers, and we kissed for the very first time. We waited another 30 minutes or so for the groom to show up, during which time the usher received a call on his phone and abruptly went outside to take it. He returned a few minutes later and disappeared straight into the room behind me. I turned to watch him, along with 100 other heads, and caught a flash of white, flowing fabric when he entered. But the heavy wooden door, once shut, surrendered nothing more than that. 15 minutes, and an uncomfortable announcement later, we were milling slowly from the church onto the unconfettied path outside. Discussions were held in small groups about whether to take up the offer of going on to the reception, since it had already been paid for. Taxis were called from mobile phones. I wandered up and down from the gates to the entrance, listening in to the various conversations and hoping to hear something that sounded like SL interaction. Somehow, I'd thought it would be simplicity itself to recognise in real life the people whose avatars and textual mannerisms I knew so well. But the metaverse was conspicuous to me in that churchyard only by its absence. The real-lifeness of the situation, never mind the apparent absence of Tresney, started to unnerve me, and, at about the third or fourth repetition of my 20-metre route, it suddenly dawned on me that I was effectively by myself at a stranger's wedding. I started to worry about what to do next. As the various guests started to move towards the road for the arrival of their cars, I realised I had no way of telling what the plans of my group were. They might decide to go to the reception, but they might equally decide to go someplace else, where SL issues could be discussed without concern over tact and sensitivity. I decided that the best move strategically would be to position myself at the gate, where I could listen in on the discussion of every group that passed, so I stood there and played with my phone, making out it was really important I consulted stuff. The groups wandered through, and I heard things about the economy, Gordon Brown, a number of different football teams, and the latest series of MasterChef. Nobody looked at me as though they were keeping an eye open for a missing person, and nothing whatsoever was said about Second Life. Strangely enough, though, nothing was said about the wedding either. People don't always discuss what you're expecting them to discuss. I supposed everyone was temporarily talked out about that. One by one, I watched the groups leaving their taxis. In the end, I climbed aboard the last of them on the invitation of the chief bridesmaid, who had looked at me part way in, her skirts lifted to clear the step into the car, and said, "You got a lift? There's just about room in here for one more if you want." In the absence of any other plan, I elected to join them. It was a London-style cab. I sat in one of the two rear-facing fold-down seats, the chief bridesmaid and her husband, and a tiny little man of at least 80 years opposite me. The other fold-down was occupied by the mint-offering lady from the row in the front in the church. Tiny drips of perspiration were beginning to show around the edges of her makeup, but she didn't attempt to loosen any of her many layers, which included a knee-length tweed coat. She fanned herself with her order of service and commented in a voice that tried to be merely observational, "Isn't it hot in here?" And the bridesmaid leaned forward and said, "Driver, could we have some air conditioning on back here, please?" I had my back to the driver, so I couldn't see if he turned to his reply, but it sounded like he didn't. "Aircon's broken," he said. I heard his window whine open, perhaps by means of compensation, perhaps so he wouldn't be able to hear any further requests. The car moved off. The bridesmaid sighed and sagged back into her seat. She was tall and plump and had a fake tan that was all over the palms of her hands. "Jesus," she said to her husband, "I could murder a cigarette. I should have had one before we got in the car. I didn't have time to think about it, what with all the phone calls and everything." Then she added, "Give me my phone again, will you?" "You going to call Lindsay again?" the husband asked. "She's got to answer eventually," she said, and took the phone he retrieved from an inside pocket. She pressed small buttons with a long thumbnail that had tiny silver flowers painted onto it, then held the device to her head. There was a long pause, and then she said, "Okay, Linz, This is the last message I'm going to leave. I don't want to clog up your voicemail in case that bastard decides to call you. I'm on my way to the reception place right now. Call me." And she looked at the phone, impaled another button with a thumbnail, and handed it back to her husband with a sigh. "Still not answering," she said. "I'm worried to death about her." "Maybe she just needs some time alone," the husband suggested. "I just need to know that she's okay," the bridesmaid said, "and not standing on top of some building somewhere." The word building made me think of Second Life. I thought about resin pine cubes on a quiet platform in a secluded sky and shaping them into something new. "There's nothing more you can do," the husband reassured her. "I just hope somebody's with her," she said. "I should never have left her alone. Jesus Christ. I mean, you slip out for 4 minutes because you're busting for a piss." Her eyes flicked towards Mrs. Mintgiver and then the old man next to her. "Excuse my French. And when you get back, she's nowhere to be found. What the hell did that usher guy think he was doing, letting her out like that?" "My dear," Mrs. Mint commented, her hands crossed over the clasp of the clip-open handbag resting on her lap. "Men very rarely display much ability when it comes into the management of distraught females." The bridesmaid glanced at her husband and replied, "You're telling me." And he snorted, an ambiguous sound that could have been either a low-key laugh of some sort, a stoic acknowledgement of his own shortcomings, or a token rebuttal of her accusation. "Oh," said the bridesmaid, "just give me 5 minutes with that bastard. Just give me 5 minutes." "Well, you know," said Mrs. Mint, a sudden firmness in her voice, "better now than 2 years down the line and a little one involved." She found herself again. "Did he have to leave her waiting so long, though?" the bridesmaid snapped back. "Would it have been asking too much for him to call her first thing if he had doubts? I expect his best man was trying to talk him into coming." I noticed Edith's hesitations. I suppose she'd be going to say his best man was doing his best, and then hadn't wanted to use the word best 2 times within a sentence. I wondered if she was a writer of sorts. She looked to me like a letter writer. "Or at least," she continued, making sure no decision was made rashly. "Men," said the bridesmaid. Her husband did another of his ambiguous snorts. "They were probably talking about football." I looked at the elderly man to her right. He was like a little painted statue. I looked at my phone again, hoping that appearing to be occupied might excuse me from any possible involvement in a conversation about men, or, worse, Second Life. The absence of the subject so far had, I had decided, been a blessing. It struck me as a sort of topic on which people might be likely to express bemusement and ask such questions of each other as, "What do you think?" At least, that was my fear. I'd already started to rehearse secretly the rather vague and generic to each their own response I planned on giving, and which I hoped I'd been able to get away with without being identified as one of them. I wondered why the topic had not been brought up, and supposed that it was probably an issue of embarrassment. How did one discuss a virtual relationship, after all, without coming perilously close to the question of cybersex? Most people had absolutely no idea how this was achieved. In fact, I would have included myself in this category before encountering SL. But the questions required of obtaining this information, however much one wanted to know, were simply not compatible with the polite decorum and the guest range of a wedding. At least, not before the evening reception and its associated alcohol consumption. Alas, my apparent luck on this issue was destined not to continue. It was the bridesmaid's husband who broached the topic, perhaps to indicate that the absent member of the men community under discussion was not a particularly good example by which others within it should be judged. "You have to wonder," he said, "why you couldn't find a girlfriend the normal way." He looked at me, the nearest fellow member, for affirmation of this view. I offered him back one of his own ambiguous grunts. "You know," said the bridesmaid, "I promised Lindsay I wouldn't go on about this, but what the hell did she expect? Did she honestly expect him to be normal?" "It's all rather beyond my comprehension, I'm afraid," said Mrs. Mint. "Still, love takes many forms." I couldn't help but feel I'd just heard the exact statement she would also have used at a homosexual wedding. "I still find it hard enough just to send an email. I learned how to do it, and then they changed the way everything looks on the screen. I could sense her trying to steer the conversation into less accusatory territory, and instantly adored her for the attempt. I mean, hello, Second Life? What the hell's wrong with First Life? The husband grunted approval. What they're really saying is they don't have a life. There are moments in RL conversations I'm on the periphery to where I want to jump in and lecture. What they are clearly saying, I wanted to say, is they want more from life. That for a whole load of different reasons, which are usually obvious when you look at them, individually, I mean, it's rarely rocket science. The idea that you could link with people from different places and share your thoughts with them, share your feelings with them, share your dreams and fantasies with them was incredible. A gift. A miracle of the modern age, too good an opportunity to be turned down. Nobody was saying people shouldn't also make more of an effort to appreciate all the things they had already. There was indeed beauty to be found everywhere. But in many people's lives there were gaps. Some of them big gaps, some of them small gaps. And here was something too incredible to fill them with. Why wouldn't one grasp that possibility and embrace it? Why wouldn't one leap straight in and immerse oneself? And how many of the people who criticize others for not having a life let their own seep away in front of the television, an escapist device which offered no interaction, no human contact, no creativity whatsoever. Everyone had a responsibility for their own happiness. Life, I wanted to say, was all about living, and who the hell were we to criticize others for finding new ways of meaningfully living it? But I didn't say that. I let it lie. I mean, the bridesmaid said, what do you expect from a computer geek? He's probably never had a girlfriend before. As I looked at my phone, I asked myself, perhaps the 30th time that day, why Tresney and I hadn't exchanged phone numbers in case of a problem. Both of our decisions to attend the wedding had been fairly last minute. The wedding itself had been pretty hastily put together, and we'd only just got to the point in our relationship where the sharing of RL information beyond first names was starting to feel okay. Exchanging phone numbers, however, still, somehow, felt like a big deal. We'd neither of us met before, or for that matter seriously considered meeting, an SL lover in RL. We'd just started talking about it as a hypothetical possibility when suddenly the RL wedding of Dev and Feather was announced. In the first instance, the invitation of SL friends wasn't part of that agenda. Then, just a few weeks to go before the date, personalised notes cards got handed out. It was a difficult thing for either of us to say no to, particularly since the train trip in both cases wasn't a great deal more than 90 minutes. To begin with, we just avoided talking about the subject. Then we were each individually visited in-world by both Dev and Feather, neither of whom could see in any way that our attendance would constitute a real-life meeting we were neither of us certain we were ready for. Tresney suggested just one of us go, and we agreed at first it would be her. Of course, as soon as I knew she'd be there, missing this opportunity to meet her was then all I could think about. We told ourselves and each other it wasn't as though we couldn't organise a meet at any other time, and we thanked God we weren't transatlantic lovers. We laughed quite a bit about that, and then the others, who had further to travel, started talking about their hotel bookings and travel arrangements. A couple of the group were actually flying over from the States for the occasion. Suddenly it was real, and happening in a couple of weeks, and we weren't a part of it. If we knew each other in real life this well, she said to me, 7 days remaining until the date, we would have no problem with meeting up like this at all. Technically, I pointed out, because it was utterly impossible for me not to, if we knew each other in real life this well, we'd already have met. You know what I mean, she said. In fact, I said, I think it's knowledge of each other that's the problem. The worry is that we'll look at each other and expect to see someone we know, and instead see a stranger. Oh, I'm not worried about that at all, she said. I know we'll see each other. We were invoiced at the time. We'd been doing this for a couple of months by then. We never had sex in voice, because we were each too embarrassed and had no idea what to say. But we knew each other's vocal mannerisms well. She sounded convinced that we knew each other. I wasn't so sure. Why is this a problem then? I asked. I don't really know, she replied. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a novelty. Maybe it's the expectation. Thinking about it, I said, might it be helpful if we did both go, that we'd be there to attend an event? I mean, rather than there just to see each other. If we ran out of things to say to each other, we could always fill awkward silences by pretending to be interested in the speeches. Plus, there'd be plenty of people about in case I turn out to be an axe murderer. She laughed. How I loved that laugh. You're right, she said. If the day goes badly, we can just blame it on the wedding. And so it was decided. Just like that. The night before the wedding, we made love at her place, a castle she was renting, with grounds that covered a full quarter sim. She said to me afterwards, I hope this doesn't wear you out for tomorrow. I laughed, hoping the fear wasn't too noticeable. Is that part of the agenda then? I asked, once enough awkward silence had elapsed. Baby, she replied, there's no agenda, but if there was one, it wouldn't be off it. But we still didn't exchange mobile numbers. It's not that either of us proposed an exchange and the other one vetoed. We just avoided bringing the subject up. This unspoken agreement was, I think, some sort of unofficial safety net. We each knew that if the day didn't work, we'd at least not have to worry about difficult phone calls. The day would be an incursion into RL, but only a temporary incursion. We didn't have each other's address details or surnames. RL would continue to be safe and separate, if that was what we needed it to be. Sitting in the taxi, still pretending to look at my phone, and less than 5 minutes from the reception venue according to the bridesmaid, I suddenly realised Tresney could still have tried to contact me by email. It was all I could do to stop myself from swearing out loud once the thought was formed in my mind. Of course she would have done this. Of course she would. It was beyond belief that the idea hadn't occurred to me until now, and yet it simply hadn't. I wondered if I was in trouble about that. If I was, I never thought to check. Sounded like a totally implausible excuse and would require a revision. I logged into Gmail on my phone and waited the endless wait for the connection to form and my inbox to update. The circle turned and turned and turned, and I decided whilst I watched it that I'd claim I'd had no data signal in this place until just before the hotel. I'd make a joke about my provider being unable to provide signal to any place lacking the letter O in its title, and if it turned out she was on the same network, I'd resort to a generic anti-Apple remark. Finally, the inbox appeared. 4 emails from Tresney. This is what the first one said. OMFG, baby. Dev's fucking married already. Fucking unbelievable. Feather doesn't know yet, poor love. Dice has been waiting at the gates to let us know, but none of the other guests know yet. We're not going to stay here. We're all cowards. We're going to go somewhere just us to gossip. Get here as soon as you can, but if you can't, I'll let you know where we are. Love you, T. My eyes widened considerably at the first sentence. The mistake I then made was next to look briefly at the bridesmaid to see if she was watching me. What? She said. Do you know something? What? I said. What are you reading there? Do you know something? About? I said. Mrs. Mint leaned ever so slightly closer to me. I angled the phone screen away from her. About the wedding. What do you think? The wedding? I said. Of course not. Has something happened? Why did you look up at me like that? You looked guilty. Just a dirty email someone sent me, I said. Mrs. Mint recoiled. Typical bloody man, the bridesmaid said. Don't keep it to yourself then, her husband said, reaching out for the phone. She slapped his hand and he winced. The next email said, Baby, we're going to a pub just up the road from the church. You can't miss it. It's called the King's Arms. Can't wait to see you. T. And then the next. Did you get delayed? I hope you got my messages. If you didn't, you might be surrounded by angry guests right now. Oh dear. I feel guilty now for not waiting. If you're there, and you get these, try to slip out if you can. No one knows where Dev is. On the off chance that you see him, can you let him know where we are? I think we should have stayed for Feather, but the others are saying she might think we knew something. She must be feeling terrible. Why do people do this to each other? Oh well. Come to me as soon as you can, baby. Love you. T. And the final message. Where are you? Now I'm worried. I'm going to assume you haven't had signal. We saw all the guests get into taxis, and I'm wondering if everyone's going to be at the hotel. I have a room booked there, so that's where I'm going to go now. Hopefully that's where you're headed. So stay there, baby. I'm right behind you. T. Any more good ones? The bridesmaid's husband asked as I put the phone away. Nah, I said, just work stuff. My mouth was suddenly dry and my heart had started to speed up at the realization that I was mere minutes away from the meeting. As if on cue, the taxi slowed and made a right turn into a wide service road, then a left into a large car park. I turned in my seat and looked forward. I saw other taxis up ahead, well-dressed people stepping out in front of a large entrance. We were at the hotel. I sent Tresney a message by email. I'm at the bar. The wedding guests wandered through into the function room, and I spotted the usher having a conversation with a member of the hotel staff, which involved him waving in the direction of the head's table. I stood at the bar and ordered a whiskey. The bartender asked if I was with the wedding party, and I said no because I considered Dev and Feather had enough stress without me adding to their bar tab. I had a good view of the entrance from where I stood. She entered the hotel about 10 minutes later. I knew immediately it was her from the way she stopped and looked for a face as soon as she was inside. She looked in my direction and made eye contact. Straight away, she smiled. She was wearing an orange-fitted dress, sleeveless above the knee, and with an empire waist. White high heels and a white hat made this rather bold statement, wedding ready. She was smaller than I'd expected. The 1RL picture I had of her was head and shoulders only, and it was difficult to relate that to the full, three-dimensional person about 15 metres distant. Her dark hair was cut to a bob, my favourite style, and I remembered both that I told her this once and that the hair in the picture had been long. I laughed. She laughed back. She walked over, and the first thought that popped into my head was that her stride was nothing like her avatar's animation overrider. Everything I knew about her visually, I realised, I now had to discard. Here was a real human being. She stood in front of me, and we both laughed again. I don't know what to call you, I said. Should I use Tresney or Sally? Come here, she said, ignoring my question and putting her arms around me. We hugged. I smelt her perfume and felt her hair against my cheek, and her cheek against my cheek, and her fingers pressing into my back, and the fabric of her dress through my own, and how this moved against her skin underneath. I felt all these things at once. It is so good to see you, she said into my ear. It's so good to see you too, I said in reply. She kissed my cheek and pulled away. I would have said Sally, she said, but we so need to stay in SL character for a while. We just have to talk about Dev. I can't get my head around what's happened. All destroyed wedding misery aside, this immediate and urgent topic for discussion was a godsend. We ordered drinks, found a table in the bar, and sat. Not only was Dev married, he had 2 kids and a mortgage with 12 years left to pay. The tangled web he'd weaved, so far as the numerous real-life meetings he'd had with Feather in the months leading up to their wedding were concerned, involved a house 20 miles from where he lived that belonged to his brother, a contract programmer working in China for the year. I just can't believe he did this to her, Tresney said. The deception is incredible. All that effort he went to. All those times he fucked her as his fiancée in real life, knowing what had to come. How did he imagine this would end? Unfucking believable. You couldn't make this sort of stuff up. We went outside so that she could smoke, and I lasted about 2 minutes before I asked her for one. She stood close to me while I lit up. You know what, she said. I really want to care about all that, but I just can't. Seeing you has just turned a bizarre day into an incredible one. You may consider that sentence suffixed with a smiley. How many closed brackets are we talking here? I asked. 4. 4? Only 4? I'd have thought we were into double figures here at least. You're far too loose with your brackets, she said. You're a bracket slut. You're shameless. Brackets should be conserved so they mean something when you use them. 4 is still a little underwhelming. So let's get to work on turning it into a 5, she said. We ate in an Italian restaurant round the corner from the hotel. I avoided pizza on the grounds this really wasn't a day that I wanted to become reacquainted with the non-affectionate relationship mozzarella had with the bathroom via my stomach, and picked instead at a bland tagliatelle and a pesto sauce. She ate 2/3 of a large Hawaiian with a side order of salad. Despite our joint avoidance of garlic menu items, the no we both gave to the waitress on her suggestion of garlic bread was a little conspicuous in its immediacy. We didn't kiss until a good half hour had elapsed of our subsequent walk around the town. The moment came when we stood back in front of the church and talked about the newly married kissing that should have occurred in front of its entrance by now. "This church is expecting to witness some kissing today," she said, and I replied, "Then maybe we should offer it something by means of compensation." "I thought you'd never ask," she said, and we took that extra step into each other's space that hadn't been breached since the hug in the hotel bar. Our faces lingered in front of each other for a brief moment of extended anticipation, and then our eyes closed as we crossed that unfathomable distance and met in the middle of our lips. She tasted of sweet cherry tomatoes. "So let me make sure I've got this right," she said, after about 15 minutes of more or less solid kissing had elapsed. "You're not booked in to stay overnight." "I have a client presentation tomorrow morning," I said. "I'm really sorry, but it's something I just couldn't get out of. I have to get back tonight." "And the last train leaves at 12:20. "So, it's now nearly 8:30, she said, with slow deliberation. "We could go find a pub, get drunk together for a few hours, and then kiss each other good night. Or, I said. Our pace back towards the hotel was about twice as fast as the one we'd employed to depart it. The closer we got, the more quickly my heart was beating, and the more it felt like someone was trying to pull my stomach out of my body using forceps. The conversation died slightly between us, and by the time we were crossing the foyer into the lift, we'd hardly said a word for the past 5 minutes. In her room, I sat down on the bed while she drew the curtains and turned on the bedside lamps. She came and sat down next to me. "So," she said. "So," I replied. "Here we are." "Here we are indeed." I looked at one of the paintings on the wall opposite, a production line orange and red abstract. I cocked my head slightly, as though finding it fascinating. "Interesting colours," I said. "What?" "The painting." She looked at it briefly. "I expect they're the same in every room," she said. "Oh, I must stink," I said. "Such a hot day. That taxi was unbearable." "Why don't you take a quick shower?" she suggested. "I could do that," I said, as though this was an intriguing proposal. Then, for want of anything better to say, I repeated this. "I could do that. Although," I added, "I don't have any clean clothes to change into." "Maybe you wouldn't need any clothes," she said. "At least for a while." "Right. Yes, there is that, of course," I said, and chuckled. "You're nervous," she said. "Why are you nervous?" "Oh, just a little shy," I said, and got up. "That's a good idea. Take a shower. I won't be long." "Would you like me to come and scrub your back?" she asked. No, that's quite okay," I said, as though letting her off a chore. "What if I sneak in whilst you're in there and take a peek at you through the screen?" "It'll probably be steamed up," I said, hand on the door. "The screen, well, sure, if you'd like." "I'll wait out here, sweetie, don't worry." I forced another chuckle and went into the bathroom, shut the door behind me, locked it by turning the little circular knob inside the door handle counterclockwise, but very slowly so it didn't make a sound. But then I needed to check that it was actually locked, so I turned the door handle itself very slowly. I managed to do it without it making any noise at all. But then I worried that the knob on the other side of the door might be turning also. "This is stupid, Jerry," I told myself. "Unlock the fucking door." I turned slowly the little circular knob inside the door handle again, this time clockwise. I turned on the shower. The hiss, the sound of the water running, the background noise I'd created, against which I could sigh and curse without being overheard, plus having the door closed between us, was a relief. I stood facing myself in the mirror, my hands either side of the sink, the glass slowly starting to mist over. "It's Tresney," I said to myself. "It's Tresney who you love. It's Tresney who you are in love with." I tried to picture her avatar. I tried to hear her voice. It's the same fucking voice. Only now, somehow, it wasn't. It came out of a human face I didn't know. An animated human face, with expressions and hair that moved and fell across her eyes. Eyes. Eyes that looked at me. Eyes that saw me. Eyes that I saw seeing me. Eyes I had avoided when we'd been sitting together on the bed. I tried to picture us having sex. In her castle, the bedroom, the bathroom, the living room, the cellar, in the grounds by the sea, at my place, in a log cabin we rented out for a week. The images flicked in front of me like still slides from a PowerPoint show, and with as much emotional meaning. Picture postcards from another reality of no relevance right at this moment. Something I'd once seen in a book, and wished now I'd somehow paid more attention to. It had hardly felt at the time like I wasn't paying attention. Everything then had felt so natural and normal and right. Everything had just happened, as though of its own accord. Everything had flowed. Once, after I'd logged off, I'd retrieved my Tresney log and pasted the text of our most recent lovemaking into OpenOffice to see how many words we'd generated, and it was over 3,000. 3,000 words in a couple of hours, and not a single one of them had felt like an effort. 3,000 collaborative, storytelling words, the story of our love together that evening. Two people, in separate places, writing it together, and feeling at the end only that they had been with each other and shared intimacy. As Benjamin Burton would later comment, one never recalled such encounters as writing experiences, but now, in the bathroom, whilst Sally waited outside, I could only relate to these things as pieces of wistful literature. Sally was real. Sally was real. She'd never felt not real to me before, but now she was here, just meters away, a real physical person with real physical lips that wanted to be kissed, and real physical skin that wanted to be touched. My own lips and my own skin had no idea how to go about this. Oh yes, I knew exactly why this wasn't a problem for her in the way it was a terrible, terrifying problem for me. I realised, as my gaunt face faded from in front of me behind a thin veil of condensed water vapour, that I had been appallingly naive. My deception had felt to me inconsequential and a legitimate protection of my privacy, but now I realised I'd been lying to both of us all along. I spent about half a minute cursing this wedding for coming along before I'd had a chance to come clean, but then I told myself, because I knew it was true, that the closer we'd become, the more we'd explored intimacy together, the more difficult it had been for me to tell the truth. Well, perhaps now was as good a time as any. I took my shower and enjoyed it, for it felt like I had a plan. I put on one of the hotel robes once I'd dried myself, took a deep breath, and went back into the room. Sally was in bed, her naked neck and shoulders emerging from the thick, smooth duvet. It looked like a concrete shroud encasing her. She smiled at me. "That was a long shower, baby," she said. It was the first time she'd called me baby since we'd seen each other. "I needed a bit of thinking time," I said. "I realised," she replied. "That's why I suggested it. Would you like to talk?" I sat down on what was apparently my side of the bed, my back to her, the toweling belt of the robe hanging limply between my legs. "Well, you see," I said, and found I didn't have the words to continue after all. "I understand," she said. "I suppose I should have realised. It's not like you're the first guy ever to do it. I must admit, though, You had me fooled completely. I fooled myself completely, I said. What did you tell her? She asked. I turned and looked at her. Sorry? About today? What story did you give her? Give who? Your wife, stroke fiancée, stroke partner, stroke current girlfriend. Oh, I said. No. You think I'm involved with someone? Absolutely not. Really? You think I'm married? She sat up a little, extracting her bare arms from underneath the covers so she could keep the duvet in place. You're not? She asked. Now she looked confused. Of course I'm not, I exclaimed. No girlfriend? No girlfriend. Then I don't understand, she said. What is the problem? Seriously, you thought I was married? She pursed her lips. I rather think Dev put an end to the concept of non-marriage certainty, she commented. Good point. Honey, she said, leaning across the bed towards me so that I could see her back. Please explain to me what's happening. You're very beautiful, I said, looking at the way her skin moved over her shoulder blades. Thank you, she said. Here's the thing, I began. She rested her chin on her open hands, her fingers forming inverted question marks around her cheeks. The duvet dropped a little. I looked away. She noticed. A look of faint puzzlement crossed her face. Then, suddenly, her eyes opened wide. No, she said. I coughed. She sat up again, pulling the duvet up to her neck, which made it worse somehow. No! Yes, I think this time you might have got it right. You're kidding me. Afraid not. It isn't possible. Oh, it's possible. Oh my God, she said softly. Her hand rose to her mouth. Oh, baby, no wonder. I honestly thought, I said, that this would be no different from in SL. This definitely isn't a wind-up, she said. You're really a virgin. And there was me thinking we were going to get through this without mentioning the V word. Oh, I'm sorry, baby, she said. But you can understand my amazement, right? Of course, I said. But look, it's okay. Now I understand. We'll just take it more slowly. It's going to be fine. I'm really sorry, Tresney, I said. Oh, baby. A tear dripped down her cheek. She laughed at herself, wiped it away with her middle finger, sniffed. She pulled open the duvet on my side. Will you take that thing off and get into bed, please? I won't look if you prefer. I wriggled out of the gown and slid in beside her. She pulled herself right up next to me, so I could feel the front of her thigh against the side of mine. This is where it begins, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Just close. You're so warm, I said. Yes, she replied, and wet. Would you like to feel? I tried not to think too much. I turned towards her a little, looked at her face. I reached across with my right hand, found her flat belly with my fingertips. She closed her eyes for a moment, her lips parted. She took a slightly longer breath than usual and let it out slowly. I pushed down, felt the rise of her mound, felt the slight bristle of recently shaved skin, then the start of a short, thin strip of pubic hair. I pushed down further, felt the dry labia against my middle finger, but then its tip slipped easily between them, and I felt sudden heat and moisture. She made a small sound on the contact. It was part exhale and part oh. I left my fingertip there for a moment, perfectly still. She said, "Further, baby, please." I pushed myself in as far as I could. My finger formed a comma inside her. "Oh," she said, and closed her eyes again. She held my forearm with her left hand, as though to keep me there. Then she opened her eyes and said to me, "Now see if you can find my clit. Just move upwards, slowly. Let my lips guide you. I withdrew back to the first knuckle. The pad of my third finger slid up the parting, like a rowing boat pushing aside the reeds. I found the small button of flesh at the upper tip, and pushed gently against it. She moaned softly. "Oh God," she said. My cock pushed against her thigh on its ascension. She let go of my arm and reached down, took it in her hand, and what little flexibility remained disappeared instantly. "Oh, darling," she said, looking at me. She sat up, the duvet falling away so that I could see her breasts for the first time, but, just as quickly, they disappeared again, as she leaned forward, got up onto her knees, and knelt to one side of me. She pushed back her hair over her shoulder so that I could see what she was doing. She kissed the tip of my cock. "Please," I said, overwhelmed, but she mistook my meaning as "proceed," and started a long, delicate lick that ended just below the head. "Wait," I said. She looked up. I forced myself to breathe, but it didn't help. In desperation, I gripped myself, but it only made things worse. Restricted, the first stream became a jet that hit her chin and the corner of her mouth. Her head jerked back in surprise. I vaulted out of the bed and landed painfully on my knees, and kept on coming, grunting, gasping uncontrollably like an animal, as I unleashed 2 long arcs of semen across the carpet, before I finally had the sense to let go of myself. "Oh, Jesus," I said. My head bowed. I sat back on my heels. "Oh, fuck." Sally got out of bed and knelt next to me, put her left arm around my shoulders, and pulled my face towards her with her right hand. "Baby," she said, "it's okay. It's okay." She wiped the semen from her face with the back of her hand, studied it, looked at me with eyes that seemed playfully to be saying, "I guess I have nothing to worry about catching anything from you." But then she appeared to reappraise the idea. Perhaps she thought the timing bad. She rubbed the back of her hand across her thigh instead, making the skin there shiny for the few minutes before it dried. She put both arms around me and pulled me into her. "It's okay," she repeated. "It's okay." All I wanted was to get out of that room and out of that hotel and back to my train and home. And then I thought about what my apartment really was to me. Some empty rooms with a computer in them that was connected back to her, and I didn't care. "I should go," I mumbled, pulling away from her so I could get to my feet. "Oh, baby, please," she said. "Please don't. We need to make this okay." "It's not okay," I said. I went into the bathroom to retrieve my clothes and to dress. "Jerry," she called after me. Harold, come here, please." She came to the door, stood there, naked, leaned against the frame. Her breasts were a little saggier than I'd expected, and I liked it. "Harold." "Jerry," I said. "Harold," she said defiantly. "Harold isn't here," I said. "He doesn't exist, not in this world." "Harold exists in my heart, alongside you." "Well, therein," I said, as I pulled on my pants, "lies the problem. Baby, you're not the first guy to ever come too early on me. There's nothing unusual about this. We can work on this. We can make it better." I said nothing. I sat on the closed toilet and put my socks on. I'd once read that a measure of a man's fitness could be found in whether he could stand on one foot whilst putting a sock on the other. It was one of those bizarre fantasies I'd kept, that one day I'd perform this balancing act successfully in front of a lover, and that she'd be secretly impressed with me as a result. There was no doubt in my mind that on this occasion, however, I'd fall over if I tried it, in all likelihood getting my feet caught up in something and performing a full face plant on the tiles, so that blood could then be added to the list of bodily fluids I'd inappropriately released that evening. In any case, I reasoned, talking the stupid thing through in my head because it was the only way I could keep myself sane long enough to get out of the room. It wasn't like the opportunity to impress in any way existed anymore. "Jerry, please," she said. "I'm really sorry," I said. It was suddenly difficult to breathe and talk at the same time. "I have to go. I want to be alone." "You need to stay," she said. "Please, Jerry," she said. "I need you to stay." Socks and shoes done, I stood up and put on my shirt. Doing up the buttons seemed like high-level algebra. I put on my jacket, noticed my tie on the floor, and tucked it into a pocket. She stayed in the doorway, resolute, as I tried to leave. "Please," I said, avoiding eye contact. She sighed. Her body lost its firmness somehow, and she turned to one side to let me pass. I left her there like that, naked, her back and head against the bathroom door frame, her eyes looking at the ceiling and brimming with tears. I didn't log into Second Life for 3 days after that. Tresney didn't log in for a week. By the time we did talk, I was in a state of total longing for her. She told me I had let her down, and when I reminded her it was my first time, she explained that this was not what she was talking about. We argued for several nights. Finally, not wanting this new dynamic to become woven permanently into the thing that was us, she ended it. For her, it was about protecting the memory of our relationship. For me, it was an end to every thought in existence in my head. But, like I said, the heart has a terrible memory. Thank God. That was chapter 11 of Your Clothing is Still Downloading by Huckleberry Hax. You can download the full novel for free from www.huckleberryhax.blogspot.com.